The lady in the hockey outfit or the guy in the dress? What do you think?
Lady.
The lady's okay? All right. Well, how about the guy in the dress?
Just doesn't look happy.
Francis was going to wear his dress today. He got a shirt, a long shirt on. He doesn't have a dress, but I have one at home. I was going to wear it. I'll wear it for Halloween. And,
I'll bring the dollar bills.
so in our culture, the males, the male gender is the more essential. But we talked about the Hindu culture, and in the Hindu culture, it's the opposite. The female gender is more essential. So the males are more flexible. They can wear whatever they want. They can act however they want. The females have to act in a certain manner. That's the way it works in the United States. Males have to act in a certain manner, and if they act any differently than that, then people start making fun of them. They give them a hard time, or they get beat up. I was watching what was I watching last night? Easy A. I was watching Easy A last night, and here's a guy. He's gay, and he's being picked on by everybody. So he pretends that he has sex with Olive, which is an odd name. And everybody starts pretending they had sex with Olive. Anyway, so it's harder to be a male in the United States than it is to be a female. Female, you can wear just about anything you want, anytime you want, any place you want. If you're a male and you are working at a business, like if you're a lawyer, and you go to court. If I went to court dressed like I am, the judge would throw me out of court. But if I were a female, I could wear just about anything I wanted, as long as it was presentable, as long as the judge didn't recognize it as not presentable, as long as it wasn't jeans, she'd probably get away with it.
What if it's jeans?
A short skirt?
Yeah.
They like short skirts, especially the male judges. Yeah, well, and you see this on television. I don't know if it's real in the actual courts, but as long as she's wearing a dress, she's good to go, and high heels. I don't know, high heels. It seems. Who's they talking to? Complaining about high heels. Somebody was complaining about high heels. Women having to wear high heels. I was afraid to say anything. I think it was Sue. Yeah, I think it was Sue complaining about man make us wear high heels. Of course, she's a lot taller than I. Okay. She considers herself tall, so she doesn't think she has to wear high heels. I don't care if she wears high heels. Does she wear high heels? I've never noticed. No? I wouldn't think so. She's about 5'10" or something like that. Okay. Anyway, so we talked about the Hindu gods. We talked about Festinger. Proposed that people have a powerful motivation to be consistent, and their cognitive dissonance is distressing feeling that they get when they observe ourselves acting inconsistently, and they don't like that. Nobody likes that. It feels bad. It feels bad in our brain. We already passed all this stuff. Okay, so we're talking about the SAT and how in Japan they have to take a test to get into college, and it's a really hard test.
You were on the 5-factor model?
Yeah, oh, that's right. We're all the way there. And you know, I went over this just before I came to class. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. All right. We talked about the Filipinos.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you've ever known Filipinos, they're really, really nice people. They seem to be really nice. But once you get to know them, especially if you subordinate yourself to them, they start treating you kind of mean. It's really kind of interesting. And the reason is because the two traits that they have in the Philippines is temperamentalness, which means that you're in charge, that you are somebody that can be in charge, and a negative way of acting, as strange as and that is acceptable behavior in the Philippines. If you think that I'm just trying to insult the people from the Philippines, I'm not. I'm not trying to. That's just the way. That's the way their culture puts them together. That's the way they are. So if I say something negative about the Japanese, and I'm going to say something negative that I consider negative in the next chapter, it's not because I'm prejudiced or I'm trying to stereotype. It's because if you go over there, that's what you're going to run into, okay? It's a different culture. Your culture has taboos and my culture doesn't even come anywhere close to. Okay, so different cultures have different ideas, and that's okay. Or it's kind of okay. Here's where I was. The South Africans. In an investigation of 11 different language groups in South Africa, revealed that 9 underlying factors, some of which overlapped with the Big Five, but the other factors did not. Now this is really kind of strange. What do we know about South Africa? Or do we know anything about South Africa? Give me one piece of information about South Africa. Anything. So we don't know anything about South Africa. When I say South Africa, you guys are going, it's in Africa, it's south. Do we know anything else? If you had been alive in the 1970s, 1960s, 1970s, South Africa was controlled by the Afrikaners. That makes sense. And they were a group of white people, okay? The nation is 90% black, and 10% of the population controlled 90% of the people. The 90% of the people had no rights. It was worse than the United States in slavery, to the extent that if they could kill black people without even anybody questioning them. It was that bad.
So how was they control most of the population? Through economics or?
Right, yeah, they had all the money, they had all the guns, they had, it had become it was a British protectorate that became independent. And when it became independent, the white people that were living there actually became more oppressive. And even England complained about these guys. Okay, and this was called apartheid. The fact that they controlled the African population so viciously, so badly. And of course, if you've ever heard of Nelson Mandela, he was imprisoned by the Afrikaner government, and he was in prison for 40 years. What was his crime? I'm not exactly sure what his crime was, but everybody in the world was screaming to release Nelson Mandela. Eventually, of course, they did. They were in almost constant civil war. No one would trade with them because their government was so oppressive, and that's South Africa. Eventually, of course, Nelson Mandela was released. They became a more liberal government, and they tried to get along. If you've ever seen the movie Invictus, it has Matt Damon. It's about rugby. You like rugby? Anyway, what happened was, this is like in 72 or 74 or something, they had the World Cup for rugby, and it was in South Africa, and they put together a team of, an integrated team. Well, they'd never had an integrated team in South Africa before. This was something brand new, so these guys had to learn how to get along. And of course, it was the athletics, it was the sport that brought them together. There was a lot of hate that was going on in South Africa at the time. Black people hated these white people. The white people certainly had oppressed them for centuries. It was just a horrible situation, but they were able to come together over sport. And they won the World Cup. They won the World Cup of rugby. And for some reason they called it the team from South Africa, nobody would play the team from South Africa. So the World Championship always excluded the South Africans, strangely enough. The South Africans were called the Springboks. Okay. And the team that normally won was the team from New Zealand. And they included Maoris on their team. They included the indigenous peoples of New Zealand. and they were called the New Zealand Blacks. And the reason they were called the Blacks is because, not because of their skin tone, but because of their uniforms. So they were called the Blacks. So they actually won the world championship over and over again. And actually the game between South Africa was between South Africa and the New Zealand team, the New Zealand Blacks. And of course, I don't know if you've ever seen the New Zealand team, but they do that Maori yell before they play, and it gets the whole, everybody just goes insane over that thing. Anyway, okay, so South Africa. So that's what makes South Africa interesting, is the fact that South Africa was controlled by the Afrikaners. Afrikaners were not just English, they were also Dutch. And if you know anything about the Dutch, and I'm not trying to insult the Dutch, but the Dutch were fairly oppressive colonizers. Wherever they were, if the Dutch were there, they were not very nice to whoever they were around. So that's Aruba, that's the West Indies, that's East Indies, that's South Africa. They were very, very oppressive individuals. They had slavery long into the 20th century, whereas all other countries gave up slavery in the middle 1800s. Okay, so the Dutch were there, and the English decided that they were going to free the black people of South Africa. So they fought what they called the Boer War. And this was in 1899, 1900. So the English actually defeated the Dutch in South Africa, excuse me. And then what happened next? Then the British left and gave it to the Afrikaners. So the language in South Africa is this mixture of English and Dutch, which is kind of interesting. English and Dutch are very similar languages anyway. But and they've got a really interesting, it's almost a Australian accent that these individuals have, but they use some words that sound almost German, but they're actually Dutch. So this picture is really kind of an interesting picture. It is, South Africa probably is 80% black now, and it's 20% white. So when we're talking about 11 languages, we're talking about 3 white languages. We're talking about Dutch, we're talking about English, and we're talking about Afrikaner, which is a mixture of the two. So those are 3 of the 11 languages. The rest of them are black languages, are languages of the indigenous peoples of South Africa. So if you look at this picture, you can see some people are white, not all that many. Here's another one. But the rest of them are somewhere in between. They had a really interesting idea about race over there, since you're either white or you're black, but there were lots of different mixtures. There were Asians that came in, so there were a lot of different mixtures, but you had to be pure white to be considered white. So they had, if you talk to them, well, you're a quatroon, that means you're 1/4 black. You're a maroon, that means you're 1/8 black. And they had all of these quantifying terms that had to do with your ethnic structure. It's really kind of fascinating. Anyway, okay, so it makes a lot of sense that since the 1970s, of course, when they did the Big Five, they came up with integrity. It was one of their factors, and the other was relationship harmony, getting along with your fellow man. Which of course the Afrikaners, and you can watch movies dealing with South Africa. There's one about some kind of alien beings coming down from outer space, and they land in South Africa. And, I don't know, it's really a weird movie. And if they bite you, then you turn into one of them. It's South African, so all the languages. It sounds almost English, but it's not exact. Well, anyway. Well, let's talk about somebody else. Some studies in other languages reveal evidence of factors in addition to the Big Five. Other studies sometimes do not find evidence for all 5 of the Big Five traits. In particular, openness to experience is the trait that emerges the least consistently in studies conducted in other languages. Why openness to experience? So we go over to Eastern Europe that used to be controlled by the Soviets, by the Russians. And here we find that openness to experience is not important. How many people have only lived on the reservation? Is there anybody that's only lived on the reservation? Do you remember when you didn't live? Oh, you've only lived on the reservation? Thank you. That's very interesting. Everybody else has lived off the reservation. I'm not talking about going on vacation. I'm saying for a year, 2 years, 3 years, you lived someplace else. Someplace that wasn't here. Okay, so everybody except one. Sherry's the only one? Okay. So everybody's lived, you've never lived off the reservation. Okay. Off the reservation. You lived off. Jeez, you've traveled all over the world. Kinda. You've been to Europe. That was fun. Europe was a fun place. Okay. So why in the world would openness to experience be one of the traits that that people wouldn't have if you'd only lived one place in your whole life? I just answered the question. You've only lived in one place your whole life, so you've never experienced anything but right there. Okay, so openness to experience isn't something that you would care to have. One of the things that happened in the last century was we fought in World War I. So we put together this huge army of like 3 or 4 million men, and we sent them over to Europe. Well, the guys that came back from Europe, whether they'd been in combat or whether they hadn't been in combat, they were different. They were changed. They weren't the same as they were before. Most of the individuals just lived in one place and never traveled anyplace else. So if you were a farm boy from Indiana, you stayed in Indiana and you were a farm boy your whole life. If you were from Iowa, a farm boy from Iowa, you never left Iowa. So you thought that Iowa was not only the only place in the world, but also the center of the universe, as it were. Okay. Then we did something stupid and we fought World War II. So here we are, we're not only sending people over to Europe, now we're sending people to the South Pacific. And they're meeting people, they're fighting the Japanese and they're meeting people in the South Pacific. And we're also sending a huge army to North Africa and into Europe. So all of a sudden we've got all of these farm boys from Indiana and Iowa, and none of them have ever left home before, and here all of a sudden they're having all these amazing experiences in Paris, France, and Antwerp, Belgium, and all kinds of places. Amsterdam, my goodness. And they're fighting the Germans, or they're over in the South Pacific, and they're landing on Guadalcanal, and they're taking the island. Of course, there's nobody there. I mean, the only people that were there were the enemy. There was no civilian population. But they were, and then of course after the war was over, they moved these troops into Japan as occupation troops. They moved them into Germany as occupation troops. So here they had this really strange experience. I have an uncle who fought in World War II. Well, he kind of fought in World War II. He got wounded in World War II. The first day he was up, it's kind of like Bob Dole. First day he was up in combat, he got wounded desperately, and he was in the hospital for 18 months. My uncle, it was the first day he was out in combat. A hand grenade came into his machine gun nest and it exploded, killed everybody in the machine gun nest except him, and it flipped him up in the air, and he did a couple somersaults and landed on his head. So that was it for him. They sent him back to the back. Of course, he had a concussion, he had a split skull, they had to put a plate in his head. Eventually, of course, he survived, but then he started interacting with, he was back in the back. He was back in the, he wasn't in combat anymore. He wasn't on the front lines anymore. So he was doing things like he was a guard at prison camps and that kind of thing. And so he was okay as long as they were other soldiers, as long as they were Nazi soldiers. He was fine. But then they started bringing in civilians, German civilians that had done this or that or the other. And it kind of upset him. There was a lady that was a prostitute, and she had murdered 5 GIs. So she was having sex with these guys, and then she was stabbing them in the throat. killing them. And for some reason it upset him. So while he was guarding the camp one night, she tried to seduce him. I know. So what did he do next?
Did you know about it?
Yeah, oh yeah, he knew. Everybody knew this lady. She was gorgeous. He shot her right in the head. Blew her brains out. No, he executed her. So he was. So what's going to happen to my uncle? What do you think happened next?
So he was probably charged with killing a civilian?
What's the question? Are they going to charge him? Are they going to court-martial him? What are they going to do next? They didn't do anything next. They pretended it didn't happen. She slipped and fell on his rifle or something. I don't know. Anyway, they didn't do anything about it because they agreed with him. She deserved to die. Right? That doesn't sound right, does it? But that's what they did. Anyway, he wasn't charged with anything. Well, let's vote. Should my uncle have gone to prison? What do you think? I know this is war. This is war. This is a prostitute. It's war. She's killed 5 GIs. She tries to seduce him, so he blows her brains out. Okay, thanks.
It's a tough one.
I know.
I'm feeling like empathy, then I'm feeling logical. And then since it's wartime,
Wartime, what's the law?
I think I'll just like snuff around.
So you're going to snuff it too, okay. What would you do? What do you think? You want to shoot my uncle in the head too? Since he shot her? She was-
No, time period.
There's more to it. I don't know. He's dead now. You don't have to worry. Strangely, well, we're not going to execute him. He died of a brain tumor. And they thought maybe it probably had something to do with his concussion. It was a really bad concussion. But he had CTE, blow to the head. This is like 18 months after his movie. What do you think? This is a tough question. This is a horrible question. Why am I asking this question? What would you do?
I was surprised that they didn't give him the medal for that.
Well, they did give him the medal, but it had to do with being overseas. He never killed anybody except her. She was the only person he ever shot. He was in a machine gun crew, but he wasn't the gunner. He carried ammunition, 50 caliber, heavy machine gun. What do you think, Sharon? What would you do? My uncle. Little guy, just like me. What do you think should happen? Different culture? Oh, man, I can never get rid of saying that. What do you think, Tiffany? You see all these crime shows. What do you think?
You know, a lot of crime shows usually let the suspect off with the plea agreement or so sometimes it's not
Yeah,
fair.
but this is the military, it's World War II, we're fighting the Nazis, they're doing stuff like, oh, the other thing that happened was that they took him to a concentration camp before, and he had to help clean out the bodies. And then he went back to the prison camp. So he had experienced thousands of dead Jewish people at the concentration camp. I know. The metal sound is sounding better and better all the time. Isn't it? So what do you think? Wow. Monique, what do you think? My uncle shot a prostitute who had killed 5 American GIs while she was having sex with him. And he shot her because she tried to seduce him. She wanted him to let her out of the prison. Or she wanted to get close to him, I guess. I don't know if she had a shiv or what. But she'd stabbed him with a needle, a darning needle. And he shot her just shot her. So do you think they should have charged him with something? They didn't charge him with anything. They pretended it didn't happen, which is kind of hard when you got a dead body. What are you going to do with a dead body? Of course, there were thousands of dead bodies all over the place, but they pretended that it didn't happen. What do you think should happen? Should they have arrested my uncle? Should they have charged him with something? The Army decided not to do anything to him. The only person he shot in the head was a lady, a female prostitute. You know? So here, you guys can argue all you want. What do you think, Edison? You put my uncle in jail?
I think it all depends on the level of the law at that time.
War, open warfare.
There's so many different circumstances that there is involved. So I guess if we were things were basically all civilized and we were at war, and definitely would have person that would be already prosecuted and so forth. But the other hand, since there's a war going on and everything else, all of those internal investigation and shots, yeah, it's okay. So weird, that's it.
I'll tell you in just a second why they let him go. Do you agree? Yeah, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I would agree. The reason they let him go is because he had 4 kids. He had 4 kids, and they couldn't rationalize punishing him for shooting somebody who had murdered 5 Americans when he had 4 kids back home that he needed to take care of. That was their rationale, and that's why he got off, because of those 4 kids, as amazing as that is. Anyway, he came back to the States and made 3 more babies, and died in his 60s from a brain tumor, from the blow to the head when he fell up, when he was blown up. He got a Purple Heart. Even though he didn't have an open wound, he got a Purple Heart, which makes sense. I'd have given him a Purple Heart too. Hell, I fell on my head. They didn't give me a Purple Heart. Okay, so if we look at the Big Five and we look at the United States, we can see that there are certain sections of the country where some people act more positively than others. Okay, has anybody ever been to New York City? Did they treat you okay? Were they nice to you? Did they even talk to you? Did they pretend that you didn't exist? That's awful. Hey, did you go to Boston when you were in New York?
No.
Okay. Has anybody ever been to Wisconsin or Minnesota? Minnesota. Visit those guys up in Minnesota, hey? They almost talk like, Canadians, because, hey, that's so tough. I know, watch Fargo, and all of a sudden, hey, you start talking like one of them guys from Fargo, North Dakota. Fargo's in North Dakota, it's not in Minnesota. But it's right on the Minnesota border, Right across the river is Minnesota. That's where you go, right there in Fargo. Anyway, the people, the north central Great Plains, especially around Minnesota and Wisconsin, is the epicenter for the friendly and conventional cluster. So if you want to find friendly people, they're right here. Hey, wait a minute, I live there. That's where I live. Okay. But actually, I'm from over here. As residents are the highest in the country for traits of extroversion, so they're more extroverted, they're more agreeable, and they're more conscientious. And actually, if you break down in Minnesota, Wisconsin, maybe Iowa, maybe North Dakota, maybe if you're in the eastern part. Has anybody ever been to North Dakota? North Dakota, eh? Right in the middle of the state, they have what they call the green line. And right in the middle of the state, it's green as all get out in the eastern part of the state. The western part of the state looks like Montana. It's high desert. It looks like high desert.
Okay, so if you're in the green part, you know, just right there on the border, the green part, that's where they all talk like they're from they're from Canada, eh? Okay, all right. Okay, so let's go to another part of the country and see how they act. Congratulations, this is where you guys live, down here in Arizona. The western states from Oregon down to Arizona house the relaxed and creative cluster, where there is the lowest neuroticism and the highest openness to experience. So that's what we see in California, Oregon, not Washington especially, it's a little bit too cloudy up there, but California and Arizona. Okay, so let's figure out who are the grouchy people in the United States. Are you ready? Okay, there you go, the people in the Northeast. The northeastern state, especially New York and Massachusetts, are home to the temperamental and uninhibited cluster where people score the highest on neuroticism and the lowest on conscientiousness. And of course, they've had problems with people from New York being grouchy, especially taxi drivers, and they have complained about it. And they've had programs where they tried to get people to be nicer in New York so people would come back. Nobody wants to go back to New York because they were treated like, you know, crap when they were there. People weren't very nice to them at all. Anyway, so that's the United States. The nice part of the United States is Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and North Dakota and South Dakota. And the mean part's over there in the Northeast. And you guys are the most creative and the least neurotic. So I congratulate you on your lack of neuroticism. Okay, and that should be the end of the chapter. Here's the other one. There we go. All right, I'm going to insult some people here, but I'm going to be nice to other people. We've got more breasts. I apologize, but there is a reason why I'm going to show you pictures of breasts again, if we get that far. Oh. So when you left the reservation, did you have a hard time assimilating or acculturating to wherever you went? Wherever you went? Where did you go? Where did you live? Phoenix?
The longest stretch of probably Kingman.
Kingman. Okay. I know where Kingman is. Did you really live on the reservation? But it's interesting. It's a nice place. But you wouldn't know, would you? Because you've never been anyplace else. Utah. Okay.
Las Vegas, Nevada.
North Vegas, Nevada.
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas. Las Vegas.
Well-
Nevada. Las Vegas.
Las Vegas.
Where have you lived other than on the Red River? Phoenix?
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas. Yeah, that's right. We've had that conversation about Las Vegas, haven't we? Come on, Monique.
When did I live there? No. Let's see.
You've never lived anyplace other than here? How long did you live there? If it's 6 months, you can count it. Okay, so where was it? California? Where in California? Pomona. Pomona. It's over down by Los Angeles. Yeah. I lived there twice, not Pomona. I lived in Northridge and then I lived in Riverside. I lived in
Oh,
Riverside.
yeah.
Okay. You know that's right, you've never lived. Do you know where he's lived? Chimley? Okay. That's off the reservation.
Oh.
Okay, Edison, give us the word. Where have you lived?
Salt Lake.
Salt Lake? Tyrone? Just on the res?
Yep.
Well, you didn't admit it when I asked everybody. I didn't see your hand waving. I didn't see that. I guess I missed it. Okay. Okay, so those of you who have lived off the reservation, you understand what acculturation is. You understand how difficult it was to live someplace that was different from the way that you were raised, or potentially, or maybe you were there when you were a baby and you thought, You thought Pomona, California was the only place in the world. Probably not. Did you go to Disneyland when you were in California? Pomona's right kind of there by Anaheim.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you like it?
It was during the summer, so it was really hot. But I did.
Oh, did you go on all the rides? Magic Mountain? No, not the Magic Mountain. What is that mountain? The Alp? Magic Mountain's another.
Yeah,
another-
that's,
Yeah.
yeah, I did.
Okay. How about the ones with the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride?
Yeah.
Okay. I know, that was my favorite. Things kept popping up in front of you. I thought that was cool. Acculturation is a process by which people migrate to and learn a culture that is different from their original or their heritage culture. So when you lived off the reservation, it was tough to be a Navajo off the reservation because you had to maintain your heritage, plus you were trying to get along with all the kids around you, and you couldn't act Navajo when you were around the other kids, I'm guessing. The reality is that most people don't realize that you guys exist. They hear your name, they know the name Navajo, but they don't really understand what it's like to be an Indian or what being an Indian means. A lot of people, especially back east, they don't think you guys exist because the reality is the west of or east of the Mississippi, there are hardly any Indians over there. And since there are hardly any Indians over there, and since they're so arrogant that they think that their place is the only place that exists, they don't recognize that you guys exist. So I apologize for that. It's not my fault. I don't have anything to do with it. But that's just the way they think. So when you move to a new culture, it involves psychological adjustment. This adjustment occurs over a wide variety of domains. First of all, you have to acquire a new language if you're going to live there, especially if it's someplace like Germany or whatever. Imagine if you would, being in the military, one of the things that you have to do when they send you overseas is you have to figure out a way to get along wherever you're going. As long as that's not combat, you're probably okay. If it's an assignment in Japan, if it's an assignment in Germany, if it's an assignment in Spain, then potentially what you have to do is figure out how to get along with the people that you're going to be around. So you have to acquire a new language, you have to learn new interpersonal and social behaviors. Just like being here on this reservation, you have to learn all the taboos. There are some things you can't say. And evidently, one of the people you can't say it to is OJ. So you have to be careful about what you get. OJ's kind of interesting. Or Wilson. Man, I got in trouble. And this was after class, and I was talking about snakes, okay? And I don't remember why I was talking about snakes, but he came in and gave me a lecture about why snakes don't have legs. Anyway, it was an interesting day, but here you were there when that happened. It was kind of interesting. Oh, here you go. So Wilson's standing right here, and Travis is right behind him, and I'm standing over here, and he's making faces at me the whole time. Wilson's reading me the riot act over snakes. And he didn't really read me the riot act. He was just telling me the story. But you were making faces at me. You think I didn't notice? He thought it was funny. Okay, so you need to learn new interpersonal and social behaviors, and you need to become accustomed to the new values of the new area that you're living in. Let me give you an example. If you live in Japan, the Japanese have communal bathing, which means that everybody bathes together. When we're talking about bathing, I'm not talking about washing. I'm talking about, it's kind of like swimming in a really warm swimming pool, but you don't have any clothes on, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. You can swim with your family, you can swim with other people of your own gender, or everybody can swim together. It's really kind of interesting. And the Japanese, of course. Do they really do that in Japan? Do people really swim together? Well, it's not swimming, it's called bathing because you're soaking. It's kind of like being in a sauna or something. It's really kind of interesting. And the Japanese used to do it a lot. They don't do it nearly as much as they used to, but They do it, they still do it. If you live in Germany, as Tiffany will tell you because she's reading the book about the Germans, they don't get a lot of sunlight. So when they get sunshine, they take their clothes off and they sunbathe because they need their vitamin D. Everybody knows you need vitamin D. So here they take their clothes off, whether they're boys or whether they're girls, they take their clothes off. And they sunbathe. In the nude, topless, whatever they happen to be in that day. But then again, the Germans really don't care because in Germany on Thursday night is nude swimming at the Schwimmbad. So it's always, if you go to the Schwimmbad on Thursday night, you can either wear a bathing suit or not, but you don't have to. There are nude beaches in Germany, as cold as it is in Germany. But there are nude beaches in Germany. And they don't consider nudity anything that is socially unacceptable as far as that goes. This really shocks Americans. It's really hard for them to understand these things. I had a friend that was very religious, and he went to a spa. And when he was in the spa, he wore these really thick glasses. So he goes into the sauna. He goes from the sauna into the swimming pool. Well, he didn't realize it was Thursday night. So here he is. He's walking into the swimming pool. He's got his swimming trunks on. He's ready to go swimming. And as soon as his glasses clear up, they fogged up after he went through the spa, the sauna. Here's all these naked people laying around. And of course, he's very, very religious. And he was shocked. I don't know. He confessed to like everybody. This guy, he's not Catholic, but he was confessing to everybody. And he was embarrassed, but he kept telling the story over and over again. Of course, we all laughed at him. Because we're mean. And we were soldiers, so what do you expect? Okay, so you need to be accustomed to their new values. In Germany, nudity is not a negative thing. In Japan, it's not either. You'll see nudity on television, on some of their advertisements in Japan and in Germany. So it's really kind of interesting. Becoming a member of a minority group, of course, now all of a sudden, before you're an American and you're around other Americans, but suddenly you're not, you're a minority. I'm a minority here, and I can feel it. I know that I'm a minority. I know that I'm not the same as everybody else. And you guys are really mean to me. Well, Travis is anyway. You could have said something. No, he just lets Wilson. Something about it. Well, we won't go into the part about the penis, but I don't know. That was so weird. Adjusting oneself. Snakes don't have penises. Is that what he said? They don't have penises. Okay. Because they don't have any legs. So they don't. I know. It's really weird. It was an very odd conversation. So you need to adjust your self-concept. What is the difference between your country and the other country? Going to Japan, of course, it's a collectivist country. So when you're in a collectivist country, you think of yourself differently. And all of a sudden, you're like the only individualist around, and all these other people are different from you. They look different, they act different, and they're collectivistic. They don't think of themselves as a separate entity. But you do. You think of yourself as a separate entity. And of course, you need to, you're constantly adjusting the transmission in your brain, trying to figure out how all this works together or fits together. Really kind of fascinating research. Liskard in 1955 tracked a number of Norwegian Fulbright scholars in the United States. These were Norwegians coming to the United States. Now, if you think about Norway's kind of like, it's in Scandinavia. So what's the difference between Norway and the United States? Well, there's a lot different from Norway and the United States. Has anybody ever been to Norway? They eat kippers for breakfast. They eat salted fish. And that dry toast stuff, wasa. Have you ever had wasa bread? It's like a cracker, but it's really dry. So that's what they eat for breakfast. No bacon, no eggs, no, I don't know, no oatmeal, no blue mush, cornmeal mush. No, they eat salted fish and crackers for breakfast and drink water, which is always fun. In the first few months of their experience, the migrants were having an especially positive time in their visit. So they visited, they had a good time, everything was going great. They were enjoying their experiences, they were meeting new people, of course, Americans. They were trying new foods, besides salted fish and wassa bread. They were communicating with people in a foreign language, and people thought they were cute because they spoke English with an interesting accent. They were feeling excitement of participating in a novel and exotic environment. So the first 5 or 6 months, everything was going really, really good for these guys. Oberg in 1960 referred to this period, this first 5 or 6 month period, as the honeymoon stage. Because everything is exotic, everything is new, and everything looks really cool. It is the existence of the honeymoon stage, of course, that keeps the tourism trade in business. So if you've ever been on vacation, has anybody ever been on vacation to some place they really hated? It was like the shittiest place you could possibly imagine. Hawaii was that. Hawaii, I mean, it's paradise, but you get tired of paradise. No, you don't. Ever. No. You could live there for 5 or 6 months, yeah. Don't be there longer than that. It turns out that the island, it's an island, and it's really tiny. I know. And all you can do is drive around and around. Have you ever been someplace you really hated?
Yeah.
Where?
I think New Mexico, a lot of trains. we stayed by train tracks.
Where is it? Carlsbad?
Grant and Milan,
I don't know
New Mexico.
what that is.
It's right on the way to Albuquerque.
Okay. Ooh, Albuquerque. I get sick every time we go to Albuquerque. Have you ever been someplace you hated? St. George. Oh,
Living
well,
there.
oh, wow. Yeah, but you lived there for a while. But a vacation, has anybody taken a vacation that was really just the worst? You've done that. Where did you go?
I was in St. George too, but we had planned to go to the different parks, and our tire blew out. The tires wasn't available at the different stores that we called to, so we're stuck in the hotel.
There's nothing worse.
And we just swam and ate.
What wasn't, I mean, the swimming was okay.
It was
wasn't
okay,
Yeah.
but
Were the people nice at the hotel,
Yeah,
or did they
they were
like
nice.
pick on you?
but we didn't do what we had planned to do, so.
Oh, that's not so bad. Have you ever been on vacation you hated? Any place? No, of course not. No, that's sad. Anybody else on the back row? I'm not going to go individually, but has anybody been on a vacation and really had a bad time? New York, was New York? It's so expensive. You feel like you have to tip everybody. You know, your hand is constantly in your pocket. But it was a great time, right? You saw the Statue of Liberty, and you went to the Radio City Music Hall, saw Times Square. I know.
Radio City.
What if you had to live there? My son lived there for like 2 years. It was so expensive. And it's like every time you walk down the street, the prostitutes were just like, oh. Did you have a problem with that? My poor son. I kind of feel sorry for him. You know, I've been all over the world. I was a soldier for 12 years. You know how many times I've been propositioned by a prostitute? Am I ugly? Is that what's going on? Is there something wrong with me? My son, I mean, he just steps out of his car and somebody propositions. He looks like me. That's not right. Write that down, Sharon. He's kind of ugly. Okay. So most travelers do not stay in a new culture long enough to move past this stage, and thus they tend to view their experiences in a new culture to be, for the most part, pleasant and exciting. I used to work for a doctor, and every other summer he would go someplace and he would be a doctor without borders. So one time he went to the Ukraine, another time he went to Hungary, another time he goes to Israel. So he's going to all of these places, and he's staying there for like 6 weeks, and then he comes back and tells me about what a wonderful experience he had in the Ukraine, in Hungary, in Israel, of course. And there was one, he went someplace that I had been. Was it Japan or was it Germany? I think he went to Germany. And of course I lived there for 3 years. And as he starts telling me about Germany, like I've never been there. And all the things he was talking about were all tourist stuff. He wasn't talking about the people, he wasn't talking about how the people are kind of grouchy and how he didn't see the Nazism that I did. He was Jewish too, and here he didn't experience that. But I did when I was over in Germany. So if you just stay there for a short period of time, you really don't get the impact of what the culture is like. You don't immerse yourself in the culture. And that's what Oberg and Leisgard found. That as long as you're there for a short period of time, then you like the place that you went to. You think it's a wonderful place. Paris. There's a lot of Americans that hate Paris because the Parisians are kind of grouchy. If you can't speak French perfectly, then they don't want to talk to you. I mean, it's that kind of thing. And then you can't get them to do anything. I mean, you can't get them to give you what you want. My dad went there and he ordered a pizza and they gave him a tuna fish pizza. I know exactly. It's the face my dad made. And he was so pissed off. This is why my dad was pissed. When my dad was in World War II, and he landed at D-Day, and he marched all the way, not to Berlin, he didn't make it to Berlin, but he was in Fulda in Germany. So he went all the way through Belgium, he got caught in the bulge, all of this stuff happened to him. And while he was in France, they had a problem with jerry cans. Jerry cans are 5-gallon containers that they put gasoline in. And so what they were doing, they were moving so fast that they were using this gasoline. I mean, how do you fill up a tank with gasoline? Well, you take a jerry can and you pour it in, and then you take the can and you throw it out. Okay? So they were doing this and they were moving so fast, they were burning a lot of gasoline, they ran out of jerry cans. So they had all this gas over on the coast, but they couldn't get it anywhere because they didn't have any jerry cans. So they started a campaign where they had, he was in the Signal Corps, so if you were behind the lines, you could wander around the countryside and pick up jerry cans. And if you picked up 100 jerry cans, they would give you a 3-day pass to Paris. And so my dad did that. And they gave him his pass to Paris, so he's all ready to take off for Paris. And that's when the bulge hit. So my dad never made it to Paris. And he was pissed. He had collected all those damn jerry cans, and they're big, they're big cans. And he collected all those jerry cans and didn't get to go to Paris. So he finally got to go to Paris when we were stationed in Germany. He came over and they went to Paris. My kids and my mom and my dad and my wife went to Paris. And I, of course, had to work, as always. Anyway, I didn't get to go to Paris. So my dad finally went to Paris, thought he was going to see all this fabulous stuff. And of course it was raining, and the Parisians were grouchy, and they fed him. I tried to feed him a tuna fish pizza. So my dad was really upset. It's the only time I've ever seen him grouchy. He's really kind of funny. Anyway, so he thought Paris was going to be, paradise, and instead paradise was Hawaii. We took him to Hawaii one time, and he just had a great time. Following the honeymoon stage, most visitors turn a corner and begin to have increasingly negative views about their host culture. And this, Leisgard saw this with the Norwegian Fulbright scholars. Oberg saw exactly the same thing. If you've been there too long, then all of a sudden the exotic aspect of it burns out. Between 6 and 18 months, visitors experience the most negative feelings of their sojourn in a stage that has been labeled the crisis or the culture shock stage. So it takes about 6 months of living there for that to happen. What time is this? 2:24. And we stop at 2:50, right? Okay, I'm good. and keep me posted. So I don't know what time it is. Okay, so that's culture shock, and you've heard of culture shock. The reality is that if you've spent too much time in a select place, it just kind of wears on you, and all of a sudden you're not having as good a time as you were before. This happened to me in Germany. It happened to me in Japan. It's happened to me in New Mexico, in Texas. Just about everywhere I've been, including here. About 6 months into this teaching gig, I had a culture crisis, and I was not that happy. I was not having a good time. And it's not your fault. It's the administration's. Those bastards. There's something wrong with those guys. My students are all great. You guys are fine. I don't have any problem with you. It's everybody else. And then, of course, Wilson told me about the snake, and Travis is making faces at me. That was me. That was just downright me. In the culture shock stage, the thrill of having novel and exotic experiences wears off, and these experiences become tiring and difficult. At this stage, recent migrants often realize their language skills are not yet good enough for them to be fully functional in the new environment. One of the things that happens to military people, especially military people that have a 3-year tour, like in what we used to have in Germany. I don't think they're 3-year tours anymore. But what would happen is the first 6 months they're doing everything. They're going on boat marches. They're eating schnitzel. They're having just a great time. Drinking the German beer, which is a lot stronger than American beer. And if they haven't had a DUI, they're probably okay. But if they have had a DUI, then they can't leave the base. But after about 6 months, they stop going out. They stop leaving the base. They stay on the base. It's possible, if you are on an American base in Germany, to stay on the base and never experience Germany at all. And that's what happened to a lot of people, especially the poorer individuals, the individuals of lower rank who didn't have the money to go out and do things in Germany. So they just stayed on base for the rest of the 3 years. And if you ask them how Germany was, they'll tell you, yeah, it was okay, yeah, but all they ever did was stay on base. They never left. Same thing happened, this especially happened in Japan. It's a lot easier to get around Germany than it is to get around Japan, because at least the Germans use the same alphabet that we do. But if you live in Japan, they use a different alphabet. You can't tell where the hell you are. And not only that, but you can't talk to the Japanese. We are way, way up north, near Hokkaido. That's the island. We were way up there, and none of the Japanese spoke English. So if you got lost, you're SOL. I mean, really SOL. The other thing was that the gravel was green. It was the oddest thing in the world. It's all volcanic gravel, and volcanoes a lot of times put off green. It's green, so when all their roads are look, it's like the Emerald City. It's all green stuff instead of gray or whatever. What do we have out here? It's kind of your gravel. What color is your gravel? Gray. Kind of red.
Black and it turned gray.
Yeah, it turns gray. Yeah, so yours turns gray. Oh, I've driven off the knee. I feel so bad. Not that bad. I know. During the culture shock stage, the migrant realizes that they do not have a rich enough understanding of how the system works to thrive. The people they initially met who were interested in them because they were exotic and different are no longer so interested in these differences anymore. They're kind of tired of your accent, whereas before they thought it was cute. Now all of a sudden it's just irritating because half the time they can't tell what you're saying. Recent migrants may also be discovering that the television programs just aren't as interesting as the ones they used to see in their home country, and they start to miss their favorite foods. If you live in Japan, you eat whatever the Japanese eat. They eat a lot of dry squid. I know, everything's fish. Everything's fish in Japan. Fish and rice and seaweed. Well, seaweed is bitter. I don't know if you've ever eaten seaweed. I can't eat seafood because I'm allergic to it. That leaves rice and, well, that's about it. That's just about all that you can eat. In Japan, only 30% of the nation is habitable. That means 70% nobody can live on. So where do you get your, what kind of food do you get? Well, you either get seafood or that's it. I mean, there's not much else. The favorite fast food restaurant in Japan is Kentucky Fried Chicken. I'm sorry, KFC, it's not Kentucky Fried Chicken anymore. And you can get all the seafood you want at Kentucky Fried Chicken. They also serve beer. It's Japanese beer. I don't drink beer. Damn. You can also get, if you're thirsty for a beer, they have vending machines on every corner that sell beer. So you get all the beer you want. And it's Japanese beer. So if you don't like Japanese beer, you're SOL. So you miss your favorite food. You can't understand any of the programs. Japanese programming is really kind of interesting. A lot of samurai stuff. It's really kind of odd. They have well, we won't go into the whole rape culture in Japan, but it's really kind of fascinating. You're making a face. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So think of the samurais. So you've got these guys with these big swords, and they can do anything that they want. They kill all the guys. So what happens with all the women? That's the rape culture I'm talking about. You never see it. I mean, it's not like they show it on television, but they always take the woman behind the screen. She's going, yeah, she's making all kinds of interesting noise. There's a whole genre of literature about the rape culture of Japan, which is kind of, I know, fascinating. It's just a different culture. Now, the strange thing is that, we can talk about the rape culture of Japan. This is a literary form, but they don't tolerate rape at all. As a matter of fact, they execute people for raping if they rape somebody. This is a problem that Americans had. Of course, they thought they were seducing, and it turned out they were seducing somebody that didn't want to be seduced. So this was a really serious problem that we had when I was over there. We were over there in 95. Yeah, 95. But this was really a serious situation, to the extent that they had 2 Marine bases on Japan, and they moved them off Japan because of this problem with the whole, the Marines just couldn't figure out what the hell the ladies were talking about, so they had to move the Marine bases off of Japan. And there are no Marine bases on Japan anymore. But there are Air Force bases. They were having problems with the naval bases as well, so there's only 1 naval base, but there's 3 Air Force bases. They weren't having the same problem with Air Force personnel, but they're having really a serious problem with it. Anyway, that's Japan. Culture shock is the feeling of being anxious, helpless, irritable, and in general homesick that one experiences after moving to a new culture. You just feel homesick. Has anybody ever felt homesick? Have you ever felt that in Utah? You felt that in Utah? Yeah, okay, yeah. All them blonde-headed, blue-eyed people, damn. What the hell's going on? Am I in Sweden? What the hell's going on? No, you're in Utah. And them's different people. The symptoms of culture shock include missing your close friends and family, missing the little things about being back home, like having conversations with anybody, like the clerk at the store or the bus driver. Of course, now you can't talk to anybody, and of course, you're not supposed to talk to the bus driver. You can get a ticket for talking to the bus driver in Japan. And of course, eating your favorite snack, which they don't have wherever you are. When we were in Germany, we got there before they transported any Pepsi over. So the only pop we could get was Coke. That was it. They didn't have Sprite. They didn't have Dr. Pepper. They didn't have Mountain Dew. They didn't have Pepsi. All they had was Coke. And you could get Coke or you could get Fanta. Fanta is a German. Coke used to have Fanta, but it was actually invented in Germany, and it's orange drink and that's all they had over there was this orange drink or this Coke. That was it. So if you wanted Fanta, there you go, good for you. See, we started having Fanta over here, but the Germans were pissed that they only had cola. So they invented Fanta, and then we brought it over here, and we made a lot of different flavors. But their Fanta doesn't taste the same as the Fanta in the United States. But congratulations on having one. I know, it's not easy to find. Okay, so eating your favorite snacks is always a bit of a trick. A sojourner in culture shock may wallow in the crisis stage for several months and then start to adjust and begin to enjoy their experiences a little bit more. Their language abilities improve, enabling them to function better in their daily lives. So at that stage, things are starting to improve, and this is after 6 to 18 months. Eventually, sojourners become better able to make enduring friendships with the locals, and they adapt to things in the new culture, such as the TV programming and the food, so that these no longer feel strange. You create in your own mind the ability to eat their food, or eat food that you didn't eat before. So whereas before you had to plan your meals and you're thinking there's only one good thing that they eat is potatoes, now all of a sudden you figured out a way to eat their food. They have started thinking more and more like the locals around them. This stage, labeled the adjustment phase, tends to extend over a number of years. People become more and more proficient at functioning in their new culture. One of the things that happens is that you find new friends. And these friends are real friends. I mean, they're friends just like back home. And because of that, you feel a little bit closer to the culture. And if you have a problem with the culture, this also gives you somebody to complain about the culture, which always helps. I complain to Marius all the time, and he laughs and tells me what an idiot I am. Or he says, yeah, you're right. Usually he says that. Okay. Okay, so you adapt to the culture. You tattoo yourself and start spearing things, or whatever. Does this look odd? Does this look strange? Does he look like one of the group? I don't know if these guys accept him. He's got a little of whatever this thing is. He doesn't have this thing on his arms, like this guy's got. I don't know. He's got a necklace like this guy. But he's got a bigger tab than he does. I don't know. All
I
right.
think he traded his watch for one of those necklaces.
There you go. That's his watch. I got another picture. Tell me about this one. Which one is the native and which one? Which ones are natives and which one isn't?
The smiling one isn't. And
I
the
know,
ones that are
she's
straight
smiling.
face are the natives.
Well, look what she's done to her face and her arms. My God, she's painted herself red. She's the only one that's not that isn't topless. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Wait till you see the next picture. This is really kind of fascinating. You have to look at everybody in the picture, okay? Look at everybody in the picture. Not this one. This lady's got a big smile. These two ladies don't have smiles at all. That's almost a smile, but not quite. Isn't that interesting? Wait till you see the next picture. Are you ready? Okay. I know. You got to look at everybody in the picture. And I just found 3 people that I didn't even know were there before. This guy, and these 2 guys. This is kind of weird. This guy's looking at her kind of funny. I don't know. I don't know what the guns are all about, but this guy's pointing his gun at the photographer. I just found that. He's down there pointing his gun. Is her dress like this? Is that appropriate? Well, maybe it's not appropriate to us. What about the Somalis? This is in Somalia. This is a Chinese lady in Somalia, going bare-chested just like the Somalis do. Do they consider it appropriate? Yeah, that's the question. He doesn't look like he cares, but I'm not sure about this guy. These people think it's funny. These guys do. They think it's funny. I don't know. He kind of thinks it's funny. How about her? Now here's one of the interesting things. She's got an arm around her. It's her arm is around her waist. Well, what does she think of this lady who's decided she's going to try to look like everybody else? Does she think it's appropriate? This is an interesting question, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know either. That's really kind of weird. I wonder if she thinks that she's being like them because she's not wearing a top, just like the lady does. But there is a difference between the two of them, isn't there? She's more obviously naked than the lady on the right, on her right. The other thing I can't figure out is why this belt is so low on her hips. That's kind of weird. I don't know. It's just a weird picture. I don't know. Personally, I'm not a real fan of AK-47s, especially one behind my head, okay? If I were her, I would not feel comfortable because there's 3 of them down there and there's 1 of them down here. I'm a little antsy about people with military weapons pointing. Yeah, I know. It's kind of weird. Anyway, and there's a reason why I showed you this picture. And it has to do with the fact that maybe this isn't appropriate. She thinks I don't know if she thinks she's assimilating, but is that what she has to do to assimilate? Just take her clothes off like everybody else? I don't know. When in Rome, do we have to dress like the Romans do? When in Hawaii, did you dress like the Hawaiians did? Did you even see the Hawaiians? Only if there's no nudity.
No.
Did you dance?
Yeah.
You didn't dance, did you? You didn't dance.
No. Yeah, just shaking the hips.
Yeah, that's a Hawaiian shirt anyway. There you go. You're wearing shorts today. You could be Hawaiian today. There you go.
Yeah.
Where's the Hawaiians? Did your wife wear one of those coconut bra things?
No.
There they are. Well, you didn't even have a bare chest. Like
Yeah, I was gonna do it that night, but I kind of embarrassed myself. I'm just kidding.
There's those triceps.
Yeah.
Them some portly boys. Your skin as they are anyway. As slender as they are. I don't know if this is inappropriate or not, but it looked kind of inappropriate to me. I'm guessing she hasn't been.
Seems like the males are anxious or something. The women are the only woman on there is like.
She's not exactly sure if this is right or not.
Yeah. You better leave. You better put something on.
Yeah, exactly. Your chest doesn't look like my chest. And these guys this may be taboo as far as they're concerned, right? I mean, it's possible. We don't know. We don't know. The guys don't. Nobody looks really angry except for maybe her and this guy. I'm not exactly sure what's on his mind. Everybody else thinks it's funny. As long as it's a joke, I guess we're okay. But maybe she's broken a taboo. I don't know. But I do not want to be around people with AK-47s, especially standing behind me personally. Sojourners may go through the same adjustment stages when they return home. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes? 7 minutes? 5? Or 5? 4. Yeah, 46. Oh, look at this. It says 43.
Oh, okay. Mine says 46. This is still in college time.
Well, I have to go by today college now. I wouldn't want the administration telling me I was keeping you guys too long. Initially, people are elated to see their families and friends again and to be able to eat their favorite foods. Has anybody been around an individual that's been away in the military especially away in combat, and then they come back and they don't quite fit. Things are not quite fitting. They don't want to talk to their old friends. When they eat at dinner, they seem a little bit uncomfortable. Have you ever seen that? The reason is because the culture that they've been in is totally different, and they've been in it for an extended length of time. For a year, 2 years, or 3 years. So a lot of times it's tough for them. It's tough for people that are in the military to come back to a traditional situation anyway. Because when you're in the military, you are still who you are, but you're also part of that group. So you give up your persona, and you accept the fact that you're now part of this military culture. And it is a culture. It's very different from any place else. And they have to do it that way. You can imagine if you have a guy from the South and he's used to being very racist against African Americans, and he's in a unit with 5 or 6 African Americans. He has to protect those guys, and they have to protect him. So he has to give up this racism that he had before. He has to throw it out. It doesn't exist anymore. He can't even think about it because they're going to protect him and he has to protect them. So the military culture is totally different. So for that reason, especially when they're isolated like that in a combat situation or an isolated tour, then they have to accept the military culture, and they can't step outside that military culture. Well, they can step outside the military culture as long as it fits into the military portion of it. If you've ever seen that horrible movie with Nicolas Cage about the code talkers, jeez, wind talkers, isn't it? Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's a horrible movie. But in one part of the movie, of course, the code talkers get together and they have some kind of a ceremony. And one guy's playing his flute, which I haven't even heard here. What the hell's the flute? I know. One guy's playing his flute and they're smudging or something. And that's okay because that still fits in within the military culture. It's not like they're saying kill all white men, that kind of thing. Or let's butcher all the Japanese people. They're still within the culture. So a lot of times we get a situation called reverse culture shock, where things just don't fit quite like they did before. Military people swear a lot, and I know we shouldn't even talk about that, but the reality is they do, and it becomes part of their vocabulary. And because of that, a lot of times it slips when they get home, and all of a sudden they say something they shouldn't say. And they didn't mean it in a negative manner, it's just that became part of their nomenclature. And you can't just flip back. You can't turn back to who you were before. Your life experiences have made you different. So a lot of times when they come back, they're not as friendly as they were before. There seems to be something wrong. They don't quite fit in like they did before. Now all of a sudden they're a rectangular peg in a square hole. .48. I got 48. Do you have 48? 250. Well, let's stop right here then. We'll pick this up next time. And I won't talk about the military anymore. I won't show any more picture of breasts.